I am 72 years old, and I never thought my own blood would one day look me in the eye and call me a burden. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of the night my son tried to erase me from his life with the stroke of a pen, the night he believed he could lock me away in a nursing home, as if I were a broken chair taking up too much space. I remember the taste of the birthday cake still on my tongue when the knife of betrayal cut straight through me. It was supposed to be my birthday celebration, a rare gathering of the family laughter, spilling into the dining room, the clinking of glasses filling the air. But instead, what I got was the kind of humiliation that tears through your soul and forces you to confront the darkest truth that love can rot, that loyalty can decay, that the son you raised can turn into a stranger, hungry for your downfall. When it happened, the moment was so sharp, so raw, that it stole the breath from my lungs. He pushed a stack of papers across the table. His smile rehearsed his wife sitting beside him, with her chin lifted like a queen about to declare a conquest. "Dad, you're not safe on your own anymore. We've decided it's time." That's how he said it, not a question, not an invitation to discuss. A decision already carved in stone, thrown at me in front of relatives who shifted uneasily in their chairs, pretending not to notice their eyes darting toward their wine glasses, their mouths frozen mid-bite. And then came the sting. "All you need to do is sign here," my son insisted, tapping the page with his finger, each tap sounding like a nail being hammered into a coffin. The document wasn't about love or safety. It was a legal transfer of power. With that signature, I would be stripped of every right to decide where I live, how I spend my money, even what medical care I could receive. They called it guardianship. I called it betrayal. Do you know what it feels like to have the child you once held in your arms now standing over you like a predator circling prey? To look into his eyes and not see your son, but a man intoxicated by greed. A man who thought my years of labor sacrifice and sleepless nights could be erased with the scratch of a pen. Do you know what it feels like when the very walls of your home, the place where your wife and I built our lives, suddenly turn cold because your own blood treats you as an intruder in your own story? The silence in the room that night was louder than any storm. My relatives, my so-called family, avoided my gaze as though my pain were contagious. And there in the middle of the table, beneath the glow of candles, meant to celebrate my life, sat the papers designed to steal it away. My son leaned closer, his voice low but sharp, meant only for me. "If you don't sign, we'll prove you're not capable of making your own decisions. The court will listen. They always listen." My hand trembled not because I was weak, but because I was holding back the fire that threatened to burn the entire house down. He thought age had dulled me. He thought the years had stolen my memory, my will, my cunning. He didn't know that behind these tired eyes lived a man who had built everything he stood on. He didn't know that the blood still pumped strong in my veins, carrying with it decades of lessons, scars and strategies he could never comprehend. I am not telling you this story for sympathy. I am telling you because there comes a moment in every life when betrayal cracks the earth beneath your feet and forces you to decide, will you fall into the pit they dug for you, or will you climb out and bury them in it instead? That night was my moment. That night I chose to fight back. But before I reveal how I turned the table, before I tell you how the lawyer entered the rooms and shattered their scheme, you must understand this. The slap of betrayal doesn't come with sound. It comes with silence, with the look on your child's face when he measures your worth in dollars instead of memories. So here I sit, an old man confessing my story, not to beg for pity, but to challenge you to ask yourself, what would you do if the hands that once clung to your finger in childhood reached out only to snatch away your freedom? Would you sign away your dignity just to keep the peace? Or would you, like me, dig deep into the ashes of your past and pull out the fire they never expected you to still have? That night, as the candles burned lower and the wine soured in my mouth, I realized the truth I had ignored for too long. My son didn't see me as a father anymore. He saw me as an obstacle to money, to property, to the life he thought he deserved. But I had one advantage he didn't know about, one secret he never imagined I carried close to my chest. That secret would be my weapon, my salvation, and ultimately his downfall. I will never forget the way his wife smirked, whispering into his ear, as though I were already gone, already locked away behind sterile walls. She didn't know I was listening. She didn't know I heard her say, "Once he's inside, we can sell the house." Those words were the spark that ignited my resolve. In that instant, the weight of betrayal turned into something else, steel. I knew they thought I was powerless, but I also knew the power of patience, the power of silence, and most of all, the power of timing. And now as I share this with you, I want you to hold on to the same thought I did that night. Betrayal may break your heart, but it can also sharpen your mind. Sometimes the greatest advantage an old man has is that everyone underestimates him. That night, my son underestimated me. That night he forgot that the man he was trying to erase was the same man who had built the foundation beneath his feet. You think you know where this story is heading. You think I am about to tell you how I gave in, how I let them push me into a corner. But you're wrong. The truth is darker, sharper, and far more satisfying than surrender. Because when they pushed those papers across the table, they thought the game was over. What they didn't realize was that the game had only just begun, and I had been holding the winning card all along. Before the night of betrayal, there was once a world where love felt unshakable, where my son's laughter was the music that filled my home, where my wife's gentle touch stitched the seams of our family together. To understand the depth of what happened, you need to see the contrast, because betrayal does not pierce as deeply unless it comes from the very heart you once trusted the most. So, let me take you back to the beginning, to the time when I still believed that family was a sacred shield that nothing could break. I was a young man once, strong in body, ambitious in spirit, and reckless enough to believe that life would always bend to my will. I grew up poor in a house where winters meant blankets of cold air creeping through broken windows, where dinners were sometimes nothing but bread and watered-down soup. I swore to myself that when I became a father, my children would never know that kind of hunger, never feel that kind of lack. And when my son Michael was born, I looked into his newborn face and made a promise I would give him the life I never had, even if it meant breaking my own back to do it. Those early years were the kind of memories that still warm me even now. I remember building a crib with my own hands, sanding the wood until it was smooth, painting it the softest shade of blue because my wife said it reminded her of the morning sky. I remember working double shifts at the factory, coming home bone-tired, but still rocking him to sleep in my arms because I didn't want him to grow up thinking his father was too busy for him. His tiny fingers would wrap around mine, and in that grip, I found purpose. Every blister on my hands, every ache in my bones felt worth it because it was for him. My wife, Margaret, was the anchor of our little world. She had a way of making our modest house feel like a palace. She sewed curtains from scraps, cooked meals that smelled like heaven, even when all we had was beans and rice. And she taught Michael that love mattered more than money. I believed her. I believed us. We were a team, the three of us holding on to each other, as if nothing could tear us apart. As Michael grew, I saw pieces of myself in him, the determination in his walk, the stubborn set of his jaw, the way he wanted to do everything on his own. He wasn't easy to raise. He questioned everything, challenged rules, sometimes slammed doors when I told him no. But every argument ended with forgiveness, with him crawling into my lap and whispering, "I'm sorry, Dad." I thought those words meant something permanent, like a seal on the bond between us. I worked hard to give him opportunities I never had. When he showed talent in math, I saved for tutoring. When he wanted to play baseball, I bought him a glove, even if it meant not buying myself a new pair of shoes that year. I drove him to every practice, every game, sat in the stands, cheering until my throat went raw. I still remember the day his team won the regional championship, and he ran straight to me instead of his teammates throwing his sweaty arms around my neck. In that moment, I thought, this boy will never turn his back on me. Not this boy. Life was not always kind. Margaret's health began to fade when Michael was in college. She had a way of hiding her pain, of smiling through the sickness, but I could see the weight pulling her down. Michael visited, but not as often as I hoped. He was busy with classes, with girlfriends, with a future he was chasing. I didn't blame him. I wanted him to fly to leave behind the struggles of our generation. Still, when Margaret passed away, the silence that filled the house was unbearable. I thought Michael and I would cling to each other, two survivors of the same storm. And for a while we did. He cried in my arms like a child again, and I whispered to him that we would make it through, that we still had each other. That year, I changed everything. I retired early, sold part of my business shares, and invested the money so that Michael would never struggle. I told myself it was what Margaret would have wanted for her son, to be secure, to never know the gnawing hunger we once endured. I signed over assets into trusts he could access, made sure he had the best chance to build his own family. I didn't think of it as giving away pieces of myself. I thought of it as planting seeds that would bloom into gratitude and love. I was wrong. But back then, in those moments of trust, I believed the bond between us was unbreakable. I remember the day Michael married. I sat in the front row, watching him say vows with a trembling voice, tears sliding down his cheeks. He glanced at me, and in his eyes I thought I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who promised he would always make me proud. When he hugged me after the ceremony, whispering, "Thank you, Dad," for everything, I thought my life's mission was complete. For years after I helped them, down payments on their house money for their children's school, quiet checks slipped across the table when times were tight. I didn't keep score. I didn't expect repayment. That's what fathers do, I told myself. That's what love demands. I never imagined that the very hands I lifted up would one day push me down. Looking back now, I see the irony. The stronger the trust, the deeper the wound when it's broken. The more you give, the more it hurts when they decide it wasn't enough. I can still hear Margaret's voice in my head, telling me, "Daniel, love them, but don't lose yourself." I thought I understood. I thought I had balanced it well. But the truth is, I gave too much. I gave until there was nothing left for me, and that's exactly when they decided I was expendable. So, when I tell you about the night Michael tried to send me away, you must understand it wasn't just a betrayal of the present. It was the shattering of decades, the destruction of a foundation built with sacrifice, sweat, and tears. And maybe that's why the fire inside me burned so fiercely. Because I wasn't just fighting for my dignity that night. I was fighting for every memory, every sacrifice, every promise that had ever been made and broken. I am telling you this backstory not to paint myself as a saint, but to make you see the cost of betrayal. Without trust, love is a house with no walls. Without loyalty, family is nothing but strangers with shared blood. I once believed Michael was my legacy. Now I know my true legacy will be how I rise from the ashes of his betrayal, how I prove that even when everything crumbles, dignity can still stand tall. The thing about betrayal is that it never arrives all at once. It creeps in quietly like a shadow, stretching across the floor as the sun sets. Looking back now, I realize the red flags were there, whispering warnings. But I brushed them aside because love makes you blind and fathers always hope for the best. I wanted so desperately to believe in my son's goodness that I ignored the signs screaming in my face. The first crack appeared not long after his wedding. At family dinners, Michael's wife Claire began making little comments, harmless at first, disguised as jokes. "Daniel, you still balancing your checkbook with a pen. You know, most people at your age forget numbers easily." She would laugh, the relatives would chuckle nervously, and I would smile, pretending it was all in good humor. But deep down, I felt the sting. Why was my memory the target of her jokes? Why was age something earned through survival and experience being treated as weakness? Then came the whispers about money. Subtle at first. Michael asking me how much was left in my savings, saying things like, "Don't you want to enjoy your retirement, Dad? You should let us handle the finances. Take the stress off you." I told myself he was just concerned. But each time I noticed the way Claire's eyes would light up, the way her smile tightened with expectation. Another crack, the phone calls. I started getting from banks. Small inquiries, at first questions about accounts I didn't remember authorizing. I thought maybe I had forgotten something. After all, age does slow you down. But when I pressed Michael about it, he waved it off. "Oh, Dad, don't worry. I was just helping set up some automatic transfers. You probably forgot we talked about it." His tone was dismissive, almost patronizing, as though I were a child confused by numbers. I wanted to believe him. I told myself I was overthinking, that maybe I had forgotten. But something inside me, an instinct I couldn't shake, kept whispering, "No, this isn't right." And then came the isolation. Invitations to family outings stopped arriving. When I asked about it, Michael said, "Dad, it's just that sometimes you get tired easily. We don't want to overwhelm you," but what I heard was, "You don't belong anymore." The house that once rang with my grandchildren's laughter grew quieter. My visits were met with polite smiles but shortened conversations. I began to feel like an outsider in the very family I had sacrificed my life to build. The breaking point, though, came one afternoon when I overheard them. I had stopped by their house unannounced, hoping to surprise the kids with ice cream. As I walked up the driveway, I paused when I heard voices through the open window. Claire's voice, sharp and cold, cut through the air. "Daniel's house is wasted on him. He doesn't even use half the rooms. Imagine what we could do if we sold it. We could finally move into the neighborhood we deserve." Michael's reply was quieter, almost hesitant. "He's still my father. Still. That word rang in my ears like a gunshot. Still my father. As though my identity as his parent was now conditional fragile, something that might not matter for long. And then he added, "Don't worry, he's getting older. It's only a matter of time." I froze on the steps, the ice cream melting in my hands. That was the moment the veil of denial ripped apart. The red flags I had tried to ignore, the little signs I had brushed off, as misunderstandings came rushing back like a flood. This wasn't just harmless banter. This wasn't concern. It was calculation. It was preparation for a betrayal they were already plotting. I left that day without knocking, without saying a word. I went home and sat in silence, the walls around me echoing with Margaret's absence. For the first time, I allowed myself to admit the truth. My son and his wife were circling me like vultures, waiting for the moment they could swoop in and take everything. Do you know what it feels like to doubt your own memory, to question whether you're the crazy one because the people around you insist that your fears are just paranoia? That was the trap they set for me. Gaslighting, the young people call it now. They wanted me to believe I was losing my mind, to doubt myself so much that when the time came to sign those papers, I would think it was my own idea. But here's the thing. Age may bend your back, may slow your steps, but it sharpens your instincts. And mine were screaming louder than ever. The red flags were no longer small cracks. They were gaping wounds tearing through the trust we once shared. I started keeping a journal. Every comment, every suspicious bank call, every time I was excluded from family gatherings, I wrote it down. I told myself it was just to help me remember, but deep down, I knew I was building a record, a shield against the storm I felt approaching. And still, even with all this evidence piling up, part of me resisted the truth. Because what father wants to believe that his own son is capable of such betrayal? What father wants to accept that the boy he raised with love and sacrifice now sees him as nothing more than an obstacle to wealth? I clung to hope, to the possibility that I was wrong. But hope is a dangerous thing when it blinds you to reality. The red flags kept multiplying. I noticed Claire suddenly showing interest in my medical checkups, asking questions about prescriptions, about whether I was having trouble remembering names. She would tilt her head, feigning concern, but her eyes glistened with calculation. And Michael, he grew colder. Phone calls became shorter, visits rarer, until I realized I was no longer part of his life, except as a problem to be solved. The final red flag came on the night of my 72nd birthday when he slid those papers across the table. It wasn't out of nowhere. It was the culmination of months, maybe years of subtle manipulation. And in that moment, every sign I had ignored came crashing down on me. I saw it all clearly. The jokes about memory, the whispers about money, the exclusion, the overheard conversation. It was all leading here. So, when he said, "All you need to do is sign," I knew this wasn't a sudden decision. It was the execution of a plan carefully laid out piece by piece, red flag by red flag, while I sat blinded by love. And maybe that's why the rage inside me felt so pure, so unstoppable. Because betrayal isn't just about the act itself. It's about every moment that led up to it, every warning ignored, every hope misplaced. It's about realizing that the people you trusted most were writing a script for your downfall while you were still playing the role of the devoted father. I ignored the red flags once. I will not ignore them again. You might think the real twist came later when the lawyer walked in. But that's not the truth. The first twist happened months before that night in the quiet of my living room, when I realized that the game my son and his wife were playing was far darker than I had imagined. And it didn't come from a confrontation. No betrayal rarely announces itself so loudly. It came from something so ordinary that it still chills me when I remember it: a phone call. It was early afternoon sunlight pouring across the rug where Margaret used to sit and knit. I was dozing in my chair when the phone rang. A polite voice introduced herself as a bank representative, asking if I had authorized a power of attorney document to be filed under my son's name. My chest tightened. Power of attorney? Those words are not casual. They mean surrendering your voice, your choices, your independence. My hand gripped the receiver so tightly my knuckles went white. I told her I had signed no such thing. She paused, then said, "The request had come in recently with paperwork bearing my signature." My signature. I asked for a copy. When it arrived a week later, I opened the envelope with shaking hands. There, it was clear as day, my name scribbled across the bottom of a form I had never seen in my life. The handwriting looked like mine, but it wasn't. The loops were wrong, the pressure uneven. Someone had forged my signature. Someone had tried to make me powerless without my knowledge, and I didn't need a detective to tell me who that someone was. Do you understand what it feels like to stare at a piece of paper and see your own name twisted into a weapon against you? It's as though your very identity has been stolen, your trust ripped out of your chest and bled dry. I remember the room spinning my breath shallow, my vision narrowing until all I could see was that forged name mocking me. That was the moment the early twist struck. This wasn't just about greed. This was about erasure. I didn't confront them right away. No, I learned something long ago in the factory back when supervisors would try to cheat us out of hours. Never show your hand too early. If you want to win against people who underestimate you, let them dig their own grave. Let them think you're weak while you build your strength in silence. So I folded the document, locked it in a drawer, and began preparing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with Margaret's old photograph staring back at me, and I whispered, "They're coming for me, love. They're trying to take everything." For the first time since she passed, I felt her presence not as comfort, but as a challenge, as though she were saying, "Daniel, don't you dare let them succeed." And in that whisper of memory, I found my resolve. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer, a man younger than my son, sharp-eyed, precise, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. I laid out the papers, told him about the bank, call, the forged signature, the creeping manipulation. He leaned back, studying me, and finally said, "They're setting you up for guardianship. Once they prove you're incompetent, they'll take control of everything. But you're not incompetent, and if you're willing to fight, we can stop them." That was the twist I had kept hidden from my family. From that day forward, I was no longer their prey. I was a hunter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Every dinner, every polite smile, every time they looked at me with condescension, I was recording, documenting, building a wall of evidence brick by brick. They thought they were circling me. They didn't realize I was laying a trap that would collapse under their feet. One evening, Michael came over with Claire, bringing a bottle of wine, as though it were a casual visit. We sat in the living room, laughter-forced conversation, stiff. And then Claire leaned forward, her eyes glinting. "Daniel, we've been talking. It's not safe for you to be alone anymore. You forget things. You could hurt yourself." Her words dripped with fake concern. Michael nodded, his voice firm. "Dad, you need to trust us. We'll take care of you." I smiled. I smiled because in my pocket was a small recorder capturing every word. They didn't know I had already begun to build my case. They didn't know that with every manipulative phrase, they were tightening the noose around their own necks. That smile must have unnerved them, because Claire frowned, asking, "What's funny?" I shook my head and said, "Nothing, my dear, just thinking how life has a way of surprising us." Inside, though, my heart was racing. I had proof. Not enough yet, but enough to know the plan was real, that I wasn't imagining it. And that's when I decided something critical. I wouldn't run, I wouldn't beg. I would wait for them to make their move, and when they did, I would unleash the truth in front of everyone. The early twist was not just discovering the forgery, it was realizing I had more power than they imagined. Because in their arrogance, they believed I was blind. They didn't see that I was already awake, already preparing. They thought they were writing the story of my downfall. They didn't know I had picked up the pen. And yet, even as I built my defense, the pain gnawed at me. I would lie awake, wondering, how did it come to this? How did my son, my flesh and blood, reach the point where forging my name felt justified? How did he forget the nights I carried him on my shoulders, the mornings I skipped meals so he could eat the years? I bled my hands dry to pay for his education. What kind of emptiness grows in a man's heart to make him betray his own father? The twist was brutal because it wasn't just legal, it was personal. It forced me to admit that my son was no longer the boy I once loved with unshakable trust. He was something else now, something colder. And once you see that truth, you can never go back. So, I played along. I let them think they were winning. I smiled at dinners, nodded during conversations, even pretended to be forgetful at times. I became the character they wanted me to be, all while documenting everything, all while preparing the storm that would one day tear their scheme apart. Do you know the irony? The same patience that comes with age, the same carefulness they mocked me for, became my greatest weapon. I was slow, yes, but I was deliberate. Every move I made was calculated. And that's why, when the birthday night came, when they finally slid those papers across the table, I was not caught off guard. I was ready. But before that night, before the candles and the confrontation, I had already won half the battle. Because I knew their secret, I held the evidence, and I had someone on my side who could expose them when the time was right. That was the twist no one saw coming. Not Michael, not Claire, not even the relatives who would later watch the truth unravel like a storm breaking through the windows. They thought the old man was weak. They didn't know the old man had already drawn the line in the sand. The weeks leading up to my birthday were a slow descent into madness. Once I uncovered the forged signature and set my trap with the lawyer, I could no longer look at my son and his wife without seeing the truth bleeding through their polite smiles. Every encounter became a battlefield, every word a bullet disguised as conversation. And as much as I tried to mask my awareness, the cracks in our relationship widened until the tension was thick enough to choke on. Michael grew bolder. He stopped hiding the way he spoke to me, his tone shifting from respectful to commanding. "Dad, you shouldn't be driving anymore. It's dangerous." The way he said it wasn't concern. It was an order, an attempt to clip my wings. When I told him I'd been driving safely for decades, he smirked and muttered, "That's what all old men say before they crash." Claire nodded, adding softly, "We're only thinking of your safety." But her eyes betrayed her. They gleamed with the satisfaction of tightening the noose. Then came the subtle sabotage. Tools in my workshop would disappear, only to be found later in strange places. Bills I knew I had paid showed up again as overdue notices. Once I discovered the gas stove left on, after they visited the faint smell lingering in the kitchen. At first I questioned myself. Had I forgotten? Had I grown careless? But then I remembered the forgery, the whispers, the manipulation. No, this wasn't forgetfulness. This was orchestration. They were staging evidence, building a case that I was incompetent, reckless, unfit to live alone. It got worse. I began receiving calls from distant relatives asking, "Daniel, are you all right?" Michael said. "You've been having memory issues." My heart clenched. They weren't just planning. They were spreading the narrative, poisoning the well, so that when the time came, no one would believe me. The boy I raised was dismantling my reputation piece by piece, turning the people I loved against me. That betrayal cut deeper than any forged document. I tried confronting Michael once, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the son I once knew was still in there somewhere. I asked him straight, "Why are you doing this? Why are you telling people I'm losing my mind?" His face hardened, his jaw tightening. He didn't even try to deny it. "Because you are Dad. You just don't see it yet. Someone has to take responsibility." His words dripped with practiced calm, but I could hear the hunger behind them, the greed straining at the edges. And when I looked into his eyes, I saw no trace of the boy who once hugged me after winning a baseball game. I saw only a man who had convinced himself that his betrayal was righteousness. Claire was worse. She became bold enough to mock me in front of the grandchildren. "Careful, kids," she'd say with a smirk. "Grandpa forgets things these days. Don't let him hold your toys too long, or he might lose them." The children laughed innocently, not knowing the poison behind the words, but I saw it. I saw how she was planting seeds in their young minds, teaching them to see me as fragile, unreliable, disposable. The pressure mounted like a storm building on the horizon. I knew the birthday dinner would be the battlefield, but even before that night, skirmishes broke out in subtle, relentless waves. Michael and Claire began pushing harder, asking me to practice signing documents so I'd be ready when the time came. They brought over pamphlets for nursing homes, laying them out on my kitchen counter as if they were travel brochures. "Look at this one, Dad. They have game nights, movie nights. You'll make friends." My blood boiled, but I bit my tongue, because the more they thought I was compliant, the more they revealed of their plan. Meanwhile, I worked with my lawyer in secret. We gathered the journal I had been keeping, the recordings of conversations, the forged documents, the bank calls. Each piece was another stone in the fortress I was building. My lawyer warned me, "When the moment comes, they'll try to corner you emotionally. You need to stay calm. Let the evidence speak." But staying calm was harder than I imagined, because every day under their watchful eyes felt like living in a cage waiting for the lock to snap shut. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat in my living room, Margaret's photograph in my lap, and I broke down. I spoke out loud to her, to the memory of the woman who had been my compass. How did we get here? Love, how did the boy we raised become this? Did I give too much? Did I raise him wrong? Or was this darkness always inside him? The silence that answered was heavy, but in that silence I found clarity. I realized that escalation was inevitable, that they had already crossed the line, and there was no going back. My only choice was to meet them head on. The escalation became undeniable when Michael tried to test me publicly. We were at a family barbecue surrounded by relatives and neighbors when he suddenly asked me to recall a childhood memory of his. "Dad, do you remember the name of my first baseball coach?" The question caught me off guard, but I answered without hesitation, Coach Reynolds. He smiled thinly, then turned to the crowd. "See, he still remembers some things." Laughter rippled through the group, uneasy, uncertain. I realized then that he was staging performances, showcasing me like an exhibit in decline, preparing witnesses for the trial he was building in his mind. But what he didn't know was that I was staging something too. Every time he tried to humiliate me, I logged it. Every time Claire whispered behind my back, I recorded it. Every piece of their cruelty was ammunition for the moment I would strike back. The escalation was painful, humiliating, exhausting, but it also forged me into steel. They thought they were weakening me. In truth, they were sharpening me. As my birthday drew near, the tension reached a fever pitch. I could feel it in the way Michael spoke to me, each word heavy with expectation. I could see it in the way Claire's eyes gleamed whenever she glanced at the briefcase she always carried, now no doubt filled with papers and plans. And I could sense it in the silence of relatives who no longer called, who no longer asked how I was doing. The narrative was set, the old man was slipping, the sun was stepping up. But deep inside, I was calm. Because I knew the truth. I knew the storm was about to break, and when it did, it would not wash me away. It would wash them away. The escalation had led us to the edge of the cliff, and they thought I was the one about to fall. What they didn't realize was that I had already dug my heels into the ground, and when the push came, it would be them who toppled into the abyss. That night as I lay in bed before the birthday dinner, I whispered one final vow to Margaret. Tomorrow, I end this. Tomorrow they will learn what it means to underestimate a man who has nothing left to lose but his dignity. And tomorrow, I will make sure the whole world sees the truth. The night of my 72nd birthday began with the sweet illusion of celebration. Candles flickered, glasses clinked, laughter floated through the air like a veil, trying to disguise the rot underneath. But beneath the hum of conversation, I could feel the storm gathering, the pressure building in my chest with every tick of the clock. This was the night. This was the stage they had chosen to unveil my humiliation, to strip me of my dignity in front of the very people who once admired me. What they didn't know was that I had chosen the same night to end their charade forever. I sat at the head of the table, the so-called guest of honor, but in truth, I was the target. Michael rose with a glass in his hand, tapping it gently to command attention. "A toast," he said, smiling as though love filled his voice. "To my father, a man who has lived a long, full life. We want to make sure the years ahead are safe and comfortable for him." His words dripped with false devotion, each syllable a dagger hidden behind silk. Claire's eyes glowed with anticipation, her manicured hand sliding a folder across the table toward me. "Dad," Michael said, firmly, "this is for your own good. It's just paperwork. Sign, and we can take care of everything from here. No more stress for you." He said it loudly, confidently, making sure the relatives heard. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some nodded approvingly, others looked down at their plates, unwilling to interfere. They had been prime poisoned by months of whispered stories about my supposed decline. They thought they were witnessing an act of kindness. I opened the folder slowly, my hands deliberately trembling. I let them think I was weak, let them savor the moment of imagined victory. Inside were the documents granting Michael guardianship over me, stripping me of every right. My eyes scanned the forged lines, the cruel certainty of their betrayal carved into legal jargon. The silence was suffocating every gaze in the room, fixed on me, as though waiting for my surrender. Then I lifted my head and smiled, a small, knowing smile that froze Claire's smirk mid-breath. I set the pen down and leaned back in my chair. "Michael?" I said, my voice calm, but cutting. "Do you remember the first thing I ever taught you?" He frowned, confused by the shift. "I taught you that a man's word is his bond. But tonight you've shown me yours is worth less than the ink on these papers." He opened his mouth to protest, but before he could, I raised my hand. The door swung open and my lawyer stepped in. Briefcase in hand, his presence slicing the room in two. Gasps erupted, the air suddenly electric. "What is this?" Claire hissed, her face paling. My lawyer laid the briefcase on the table, clicking it open with the finality of a gun cocking. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, before Mr. Daniel is pressured into signing anything, "I think it's only fair you all see the truth." One by one, he pulled out documents, photographs, recordings. First, the forged power of Attorney My counterfeit signature displayed for all to see. He explained how the handwriting expert confirmed it was not mine. Gasps circled the table, relatives whispering. Then came the recordings played aloud in the silence of the room. Claire's voice clear as a bell saying, "Once he's inside, we can sell the house." Michael's hesitant reply, "He's still my father," cutting like a confession of intent. The room erupted in murmurs, heads turning, eyes narrowing on the culprits. Michael's face flushed crimson, his jaw clenched as he tried to shout over the evidence. "This is nonsense. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's sick. But the lawyer cut him off sharply. "On the contrary, Mr. Daniel has been recording every interaction, every attempt at manipulation, every lie you've spread. This is not the voice of a senile old man. This is the voice of a father, forced to defend himself against the greed of his own son." Claire tried to laugh, but the sound cracked in her throat. "This is ridiculous. He's exaggerating. Everyone knows old men get paranoid." The lawyer's hand slammed another document onto the table. The bank's report of the attempted forgery, time-stamped, verified. Her words died instantly, her face draining of color. The room turned into a courtroom, every guest a silent jury. Their eyes bore into Michael and Claire, who now squirmed in their seats, their masks of confidence shattering. My voice rose above the chaos, steady and unflinching. "You wanted me to sign away my life tonight, but instead, you signed away your souls the moment you chose greed over blood." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stared at me, his chest heaving, his eyes filled with a fury that could no longer hide the truth. "You can't do this," he hissed, his voice trembling. "I'm your son." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper, sharp enough to cut glass. "No. You stopped being my son the moment you decided I was worth more dead than alive. Tonight you are nothing but a thief who failed." Claire burst into tears, a performance meant to sway sympathy, but no one moved to comfort her. Relatives shifted their chairs away, disgust etched on their faces. Michael's hands shook as he grabbed the papers, tearing them in half, as though destroying them would erase the evidence already piled against him. But the more he tore, the more powerless he looked, a man unraveling in front of everyone. I rose slowly, every eye following me. For the first time that evening, my voice rang with thunder. You all heard the truth. You all saw the evidence. Tonight was supposed to be the night they erased me. Instead, it is the night they erase themselves. Let this be a warning to anyone who thinks age equals weakness. Never mistake patience for surrender. Never mistake silence for ignorance, and never ever underestimate the dignity of an old man. The room erupted, some clapping, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Michael slumped in his chair defeated, while Claire buried her face in her hands. The confrontation was over. The truth was out. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders, replaced by the fire of vindication. When the storm of that night finally settled, the room was left in a silence so thick you could hear the sound of hearts breaking. Michael sat hunched over his once proud shoulders, caving in under the weight of exposure, while Claire sobbed quietly, her crocodile tears unable to wash away the poison of her schemes. The relatives who had come expecting a birthday dinner found themselves unwilling witnesses to a trial, and they had chosen their verdict without a single word guilty. I stood at the head of the table, no longer the target, no longer the frail old man they thought they could manipulate. In that moment, I was the judge of my own fate, and for the first time in years, I felt the full weight of my dignity return heavy and unbreakable. I looked down at my son, the boy I had once carried on my shoulders, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, and I realized that I could no longer save him from himself. Betrayal had carved too deep a wound, and now the consequences had to follow. "Michael," I said, my voice low but steady, "I once dreamed that you would carry forward the legacy your mother and I built with our blood and sweat. But tonight I see that you buried her twice, once when we laid her body to rest, and again when you chose to bury your father alive for money." His eyes flickered, pain flashing across his face, but pride kept his lips sealed. I continued, "From this day on, you will not inherit 1 cent of what I built. The trust you betrayed is broken beyond repair, and the only thing left for you is the knowledge that greed has cost you everything." Gasps rippled through the room, but I pressed on. I announced then and there that my estate would be redirected into a foundation, one that would serve elders who had been abandoned, manipulated, or discarded by their families. I wanted my fortune, my life's work to serve as a shield for those who could not defend themselves, to ensure no one else would endure the humiliation I had faced. The lawyer confirmed it. The documents had already been signed, sealed, and secured. There was no way back for Michael and Claire. I turned to the relatives, my gaze sweeping across their faces. You saw the evidence. You heard their words. Let this night be a lesson. Family is not defined by blood alone, but by loyalty, respect, and love. Without those, we are nothing more than strangers. No one dared to argue. A few nodded solemnly. Others avoided my eyes, ashamed for ever believing the lies whispered about me. Michael finally stood, his fist clenched, his voice cracking with desperation. You can't cut me off. I'm your son. You owe me. The words tore through me, not because of their audacity, but because of what they revealed, that all the years of sacrifice, all the nights of labor, all the love poured into him, had turned into a debt he believed I owed him. I shook my head, a sorrow deeper than anger filling me. No, Michael, I owed you love, guidance, protection, and I gave you all of that. What you did with it, that was your choice. Tonight you chose greed over family, and now you must live with that choice. Claire tried to pull him away, whispering frantically, but he resisted, his eyes locked on me, wild and uncomprehending. He wanted me to break, to retract my words, to extend one last hand of forgiveness. But I did not move. For once I chose myself. For once I chose dignity over duty. He stormed out, dragging Claire behind him, the sound of the door slamming echoing like the final nail in the coffin of our bond. The guests dispersed in uneasy silence, their whispers trailing after them. Some looked at me with newfound respect, others with pity. But I no longer cared. I had faced the betrayal head-on, I had exposed the truth, and I had reclaimed my life. When the last of them left, I stood alone in the quiet house, the candles burned low, the remnants of the feast cold on the table. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, the air tasting of freedom rather than fear. Later that night, I sat in my study, Margaret's photograph resting on the desk beside me. I spoke to her again, as I had so many nights before, but this time my words carried not sorrow, but triumph. We did it, love. They tried to erase me, but instead I erased their lies. Our legacy will not be squandered. It will live on in the lives of those who need it most. And in the stillness of that room, I felt her presence warm and approving, as though she were smiling down at me from somewhere beyond the veil. I am not telling this story to paint myself as a hero. I am telling it because too many of us grow old believing that age means weakness, that our voices no longer matter, that betrayal is something we must quietly endure. But hear me. Now, silence is not the answer, patience is not surrender, and dignity is never negotiable. So, I leave you with this confession, this lesson carved into my bones: never underestimate the power of the forgotten, the discarded, the underestimated. We may be old, but we are not powerless. We may be tired, but we are not broken. And when the time comes, when betrayal tries to strip us of everything, we will rise. Now, I turn to you, listening to my story. What would you have done in my place? Would you have signed the papers, surrendered for the sake of peace? Or would you have fought, even if it meant standing alone, even if it meant losing the people you love most? Tell me, share your truth, because stories like mine are not just mine, they are ours. And every time one of us speaks, the silence that betrayal thrives on begins to crumble.